are longtime friends of Osi and Selma Sladek. Osi, of course, was our first executive director at Temple Sinai, and he is an incredible educator. He's also, and people may not remember this, for the longtime members do, he was our first great song leader. When Rabbi Zwerin was first opening up Temple Sinai some 53 years ago, they had Ozzy out there with his accordion, beginning Shabbat services, leading with Zmirot, with classic Jewish tunes, and it set the tone for a Hamish feel. Now, Ozzy comes by that Hamish feel quite naturally. He has a Yiddish heart, a Yiddish soul that he brought with him, but all the joy and all of the musical talent that he shared, and of course administrative talent, and then the educational talent that came despite the fact when he went through as a child growing up as a survivor in the Holocaust. What he and his family did to survive is beyond our imagination, and that we have the opportunity to hear from him. Some of you have heard his story in part before. I say in part because when we've had Yom HaShoah services, it's usually been a part of a service or a program. And so that gave us maybe 20 minutes or 25 minutes. And when I tell Ozzy that, he'd say, how can I tell my story in 20 minutes? And he's right. He's right. He can't. So Lunch and Learn is an opportunity. We have a full hour, and he gets to share his story in whatever detail. And he's also such an engaging personality. We all love him. So we want to be able to give you an opportunity to follow up with some questions and some thoughts as well. This is Yom HaShoah. It's the 26th day of Nisan. And around the world, people are observing the memory of 6 million who were murdered in the Holocaust. We also pause and think of those who survived the Holocaust, both the survivors and their children, because the scars, emotional, spiritual, social, are deep. And so we pause this day to think of them and how our mitzvah is to honor their memory, to support them, to make sure that their story is told and is honored as we go forward into the future generations. This story that Ozzy is going to share with us is Torah. It's an important chapter in the history of our people. And so we say a blessing as we do every Lunch and Learn. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise you, Adonai, our God, creator of the universe. You've sanctified us with mitzvot, and you've commanded us to engage with words of Torah, the Torah that comes from the text, the Torah that comes from the heart. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Osi Sladek to share with us his story and his teaching. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rabbi, for that introduction. I didn't know all of those things about myself, but now I know them. And anyway, it's good to see all of you. A couple of you have heard my story before, years ago. And obviously, I can't tell you all the details because there's just too many things that happened to me. And of course, it's a story of my family, really. My parents and I, may they rest in peace. And we were just one of those exceptions to the rule. The rule, of course, was made by the Nazis, and the rule was to destroy, eliminate all the Jewish people in Europe. And unfortunately, most of my family was killed in camps and hard labor camps and so on. And just to let you know that my family, that close to 50 people, I'm talking about grandparents, parents, cousins, and close family. About 22 of us survived, and all the rest of them, including all of my grandparents, they all died in concentration camps. So as I talk to you about myself, you have to understand that we survived as a family, three people. Of course, to me, it was different from the standpoint that I was a young kid and I saw things with my young child's eyes, and I heard things with my child's ears. The amazing thing is that after all of these years, a lot of these occurrences, a lot of the things that happened to us, when I close my eyes, many times I'm right there where I was as a kid. So I'm grateful that my mind has retained many of these scenes from the Holocaust. So those are the things that I can share with you. I'm not gonna deal with any general issues that took place, internationally and politically and so on. I'm sure you have read books and seen movies and so on. I would be just spending a lot of time on that. Uh, just let me tell you a couple of little things. I was born in Czechoslovakia in one of the uh, exemplary democracies before World War One, II. So I don't remember most of that. My memory starts at about the age of 6, 7 in Slovakia, which now was not part of Czechoslovakia. The two entities separated in 1938. So my family's, um, my parents, my dear father came from a progressive Jewish family. I guess today you would call it reform. My mother, Irene, she came from a traditional Orthodox family. So that was the setup that I was raised in. And uh, my father's grandparents were very enamored with Germany. As you know, Germany was a major force before World War II, and a lot of Jewish people in my town were very friendly and to German culture, and so I grew up actually speaking German when I was very young, because my parents had a German nanny, took care of me while they were running their business. So I started speaking German. Then I continued in Slovak school, and my mother came from a Hungarian section of Slovakia. There was a lot of Hungarian discussion at home. So I'm telling you this for a reason. So by the time I was 8 years old, I spoke three languages, and some of it helped me as things developed. Uh, I will just highlight some of the things that happened that were kind of key to our survival. Number one that I feel is important to share is that most of the Jewish people in my town, and by the way, the name was Prešov, Slovakia, Eastern Slovakia. The whole town was for maybe 20,000 people, mostly Catholics, and there were 6,000 Jewish people, which was a pretty high percentage for a small city like that. Uh, when things started happening and uh, the Jewish people became a target of the new Slovak government, who was an ally of Germany, um, in the early 1940s, 1942 actually, the roundups began in my city, and they were the paramilitary force called the Hlinka Guard, and they were put in charge of picking up the Jewish families from their homes. Now, at that time, my parents were already continuing to work in the store, which used to be theirs, but it was Aryanized, which means the store was taken away from them, because obviously the Jewish families, the Jewish people in my town were impoverished. Everything was taken away from all of us, to the point where we were no longer even citizens of our own country. Now, what I want to point out to you is one thing that is very important to me even today in my life, and Selma also is supporting me with that. My parents had very close friends. My father went to college with a man, his name Dr. Joseph Schultz, became the head judge in our city. And as a little kid, I remember going over with my parents every year for Christmas, helping them celebrate Christmas. Wonderful people, loving people. And there was a close friendship between my family and them. And now, this was important when things started to happen and the Jews were picked up and taken away. Dr. Schultz was willing to stick out his neck, and of course, secretly, he would let us know in advance when the roundups of the Jewish people in the city were happening. Now, to us, that was a very, very important thing, because we had to hide. We had to just simply disappear from the scene, so that when they come and knock on the door, where we were actually in semi-hiding already, we were not there. And of course, he told us to make sure that we find some place to hide. Now, and my dear mother, who was a wonderful woman, a beautiful woman, and a great sales lady, she had a few customers who loved her, and they used to schmooze a lot in the store. She asked them whether they would hide us in their houses. These are Christians I'm talking about. And she found two ladies who said, yes, we will help you out, and whenever you need to hide, just come over and we'll hide you. Okay, so that was a tremendous, tremendous help to us. Okay. Now, the other thing that I think is important for me to share with you also, that I was a little boy. One of the things that my parents sold in their store was children's toys. And when they got toys in the store, I wanted to go there and play with those toys, because they were wonderful toys that were actually made in Germany. And one day, just before Christmas, I was sitting in the store playing with the toys. While I was doing that, my parents, of course, told me that afterwards, a German soldier walked into our store. And well, ours, it was not ours anymore, but my parents still worked there. And by the way, there were no German troops in Slovakia, which had to do with the agreement between our government and the Nazi government, that if the Slovak government will provide labor to Germany, namely Jews, okay, that they were not going to send any troops to Slovakia. So that was the deal. That's why we had no German troops in Slovakia. But this German soldier showed up, like a week before Christmas, 1942. And he came to shop. He came from Poland. Now, if you know the map, Poland is just above Slovakia. And at that time, at that time of 42, the Russian army was pushing the Nazi army eastwards and then down towards Slovakia. And this guy was given leave to go home to his parents for Christmas. He was a young man. And when he saw me playing on the floor there with the toys, he asked my mother, "Is this your child?" So she said, "Yes, that's my only son, my only child." So he knew that we were Jewish. So he told my mom, "You know, ma'am, I want to tell you something that you will not be happy to hear. I'm coming from Poland now, and the fate of the Jews there is just terrible. They are being picked up by the local militias there, put into ghettos, and then from there they are sent to camps. And the first ones that are going to suffer is the children. So do what you can and hide this kid somewhere away." So that was his message to my mom. Now, to us, it was like a God-sent message, because that German soldier, I mean, I'm sure if his commander would know what he said to us, he probably would have been court-martialed or something. But my mom was such a wonderful person that, she just drew in the customers. And so that was another thing that was very, very important. Now, up to that point, the Jews in my city really didn't know much of what was going on outside of Slovakia. Okay, the Germans were wonderful, sealing the borders so no bad news would come across, and so that was just another time when my mom talked to her friends, her Jewish friends, and says, I couldn't believe what this young man told me about what was going on in Poland. And another thing that I have to share with you also, that the early 1942, our government sent out a message to the Jewish community. Our dear friends, Germany, our allies, are in need of some young people going to work in factories in Germany, because Germany is fighting communism. They're in Russia at that time. They're already fighting Russia, and as you know, the Jews in Europe were not happy to be communists, and so they felt like it's okay with us, we'll help them. So what happened was that they asked for young men, between the ages of 16 and 30, to volunteer to go to Germany and help Nazi Germany, in their factories to produce munitions. What do you think happened? There were a whole bunch of young people. They packed their suitcases, and with the blessing of their parents, they got on the train and they went to Germany. 3 months later, in the springtime, they asked for women, young women. They did the same thing, and they went also. Volunteer. Nobody, they weren't forced to do that. And here is a terrible tragedy that you really don't hear too much about this, what happened there at that time like this. Those young people, after they got there, and of course they they suffered greatly because they were neglected. They worked 18 hours a day. They didn't have any medical service. Food was miserable. They were working them to death, basically. That's what they were doing. And after they got there, they put them in a room, and they gave them postcards, and they told these young people, Send this postcard to your parents. Tell them what a wonderful time you have here. How well we take care of you. And, send it to your family. Now, if you would be a young Slovak Jew sitting in that room, right, and having a Nazi soldier with a machine gun aimed at you, you were told, write that postcard, write what we are telling you, what would you do? Obviously, they wrote home to their parents that everything was wonderful and they were having a good time and all of that. And I remember my parents had friends whose kids volunteered to go. And they came and they showed the postcards to my parents and say, look, our uncle just wrote a postcard and the kids are doing well and thank God everything is well. The reason I like to tell that story, and especially to young people, that that's the nature of the Nazis. Okay, they were just propaganda-wise, lying, cheating, stealing. It was their favorite thing. This is how they destroyed the Jews, by pulling things like this. And I think it's important for people, especially Jewish people, to understand some of these minor kind of behind the scenes things that were happening, because that was the nature of the Germans at that time. So now I'm going to go back to what happened after the German soldier, which obviously he was a decent human being by telling my mother what he did. And so we were hiding, of course, and my parents for a little longer were able to still work. And then the government, at the beginning of 1943, the government was issuing special permits to businessmen who were important to the business, well, to the economy of the city, okay, of the state, basically, because the same thing was happening in every Slovak city, okay. And by the way, at that time in Slovakia, there were about 90,000 Jews, approximately 90,000 in Slovakia, and in the Czech part that was before Czechoslovakia, the Czech part, there were over 100,000, about 140,000 Jews. So it's important to understand the numbers, because I talked to a lot of non-Jewish people, and they kind of had the feeling that there were a lot of Jewish people living in Europe. Even today, there are a lot of Jews in the world, and I try to make them understand that we were a tiny, tiny little percentage of the total population. So my father got a special white card, they called it, and they were allowed to stay because they needed it for the economy of the city. Now I'm going to the beginning of 1943. I turned 8 years old, and the pickups of the Jews kind of slowed down in 1943. Why? There was a reason for it that I just actually read about it in a book. And the reason was that the agreement that the Nazis had with the Slovak government was that for every Jew that they sent to resettle to Germany, now that was the key word here. They were resettling Jewish people from Slovakia to Germany, and with every Jew that they sent, they had to send also 500 Deutschmarks. Now imagine that they were schlepping money out of the Slovak government every time they sent a Jew to Germany. Okay, I mean, it was stupid, the whole thing, if you think about it. So finally, the Slovak government came to their senses in the beginning of 43. They said that this thing is just not working out economically for Slovakia. Okay, so they stopped picking up Jews, the Slovaks. And so this was, as I said, I turned 8 years old in March of 1943. So my parents told me, Osi, we are really worried about you. We are our only child. We want you to live. We want you to grow up to be, have a normal life and so on. So my mom told me, Dad and I decided to send you to Hungary. Uh, my mom had an older sister and her family in Hungary at that time. The name of the city was in Hungarian was called Kassa. It used to be Slovak Košice, but the borders, the Nazis changed the Slovak-Hungarian borders also before the war started. And at that time, Horthy Miklós, who was the regent of the Hungarian government, he still protected the Jews of Hungary. So the Hungarian Jews were still living a free life in Hungary. So my parents figured, why not send our little Osi to our family in Hungary, and God willing, this will all pass soon, and he will not have to worry about every time there's a knock on the door. And by the way, the knock on the door meant that little Osika had to run into the bedroom, hide under the bed, just in case there were these goons coming in looking for somebody, to pick up and take away. So I went through that scene many times, where the minute there was a knock on the door, I was under the bed 2 seconds later. So, um, and they told me we are gonna send you to Hungary to live with your aunt and uncle. And of course, that was the first time I heard my parents tell me that they were going to send me away. At first, I didn't pay attention. So I said, how am I going to go? Well, don't worry, we'll work it out. Well, the only way to go is to be smuggled across the border, across the Hungarian border. So at that point, I got very upset. And of course, as a little boy, I was crying and I was, objecting to all of that and so on. But in the end, I gave in because my dear parents were telling me that I shouldn't worry about them. They'll be fine. But they want me to just go to school and live normally. So finally, I gave in. And one day after, a few days later, a tall Gentile man shows up to pick me up. He was a smuggler. Of course, he was paid good money by my parents, but he was an expert. He knew how to take me across the border, and this was winter of 1943. That in the weather books, weather history of Slovakia was the worst winter in their history. So it was really very cold out, snowing. This guy came, I was crying, and of course, as I stepped out of our place, and by the way, we were living in a hiding place already by then. My mom says to me, Osi, listen to me. If anybody stops you and asks you, where are your parents? Tell them that your parents died, that you are a orphan, okay? Your parents were killed by the Nazis, and that was the message I got from my dear mother just at the moment I was leaving. Now, can you imagine a little guy like me being 8 years old? Your mother is telling you, tell them that you don't have parents. It just messed up my mind completely. I mean, I was so upset, and this guy, of course, took me, and he couldn't put me on a bus or on a train. No way, because there was the police, there were the Rinka guard, the goons who were, walking around the cities and towns looking for Jews. If they catch me, if they find out I'm Jewish, that's going to be, obviously, they're going to send me on a train to someplace. So that whole trip, I mean, I can't describe it to you. I was a little kid, and it terribly upset me, okay? So the end of the day, it was dark already. He got me to a place where there was, the snow was probably about 6, 8 inches high. So I had a hard time walking. So we were walking all day long in snow. And from time to time, he would put me on his back and carry me and give me some food. Uh, After dark, we came to like a little forest, and I saw in front of me this real beautiful meadow covered with snow, and there was a full moon, and it looked like a mirror. So this guy tells me, Osi, you have to cross this meadow uh, because uh, you know you this is going to be where you are going to be crossing the border. So I figured meadow, I always heard about the border has some kind of a fence or something like this. When in school, the teachers used to tell us. Anyway, he tells me, pretend you are a bunny rabbit. Get down on your fours and just keep hopping across. That was probably about 200 meters long, you know. And he told me, when you get to those trees across there, just sit down and wait for me. We'll continue from there. So I was hopping and hopping and hopping. And at one point, when I was about the middle of it, I can hear the shots coming from the side. And, and I got so scared. The first thought I had, oh my God, there must be some hunters hunting for rabbits. So I lie down on my stomach, and I was just shaking and crying. I was afraid that they're gonna eat me for a supper, something like that. Uh, so that stopped after a while, and finally I got to the trees. I sit there, I'm crying. I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought maybe this guy, if he leaves me here, I don't know where to go, what to do. I didn't have anything in my pocket. Nothing, not a name, not anything. And so after about, I don't know how long it could be, 10 minutes, it could have been half an hour, he shows up. He tells me to get up. He pats me on the head. He says, Osi, you did a good job. We are continuing. From there, about an hour later, we came to a little farm. Uh, I was now handled by all, Christians, farmers, and so on, and members of this smuggling group. And they gave me food. I slept there. Next morning, they woke me up real early. It was still dark. They put me in a little jalopy car, and they drove me to Kassa, to the Hungarian town. I was now on the Hungarian side. And of course, they spoke Hungarian, and I was able to answer them in Hungarian. Uh, and we got to this town, and it was early morning, and this guy stops his car and tells me, get out, stand on the corner. It was in the center of the city. Uh, and says, stand on the corner and somebody in your family will pick you up. So I get out. I was really dressed, really warm. So, uh, but it was cold out. It was really cold. It's freezing. And I'm standing there and standing and waiting and nothing. And I don't see anybody. Basically nobody, because it was like early morning, winter, nobody in the street. And all of a sudden, a policeman walks towards me. They had these policemen on the beat, walking on foot. So he comes to me and he says to me, little boy, what are you doing here? Where are your parents? So here we go. I had to repeat what my mother told me, okay? I don't have parents. And I could speak to him in Hungarian also. My parents were killed by the Nazis, by the Germans. I didn't say Nazis, by the Deutsche, And so after interrogating me, he takes me to the police station. The police station, they put me in a room, and it looked to me like they were going to interrogate me, because my dear father, he took me to American movies before that the war started, and I saw interrogations in the movies. They put a chair next to me with a towel over there and a pail of water. I started to shake and cry again. I didn't know they were going to beat me up, and stuff like that. And the chief of the police station came in, and he was interrogating me. He was asking all kind of questions. And of course, I told by my mother, don't tell them the truth. Always lie. Tell them lies. And you know what? The worst thing was to me, I was brought up Orthodox, okay? One of the first thing I heard since I was a little child, don't lie, okay? Don't lie. Don't do this. Don't do that, you know? And here my dear mother tells me just lie, make up lies, but don't tell the truth. And you know what? I tell you who I was scared of. I tell you the truth. I was not so scared of this puncher, this fat little guy, the chief or who was. I was afraid of God. I was sitting there and I was looking up and I said, God, forgive me. Yeah. When you grow up Orthodox, it's very serious business here. Okay. So after hours of sitting there, they gave me lunch at one point. Finally, he asked me, "Hey, little boy, do you have family here?" I said, "Yes, I have an aunt and uncle." "What's their name?" Last name was Singer. So he gets on the phone, and sure enough, I found them. And about an hour later, I was picked up by my aunt and one of her daughters. Just a little sideline here, a little side. This chief of police name was Chatari. Chatari. I didn't know that well. Later, when I was staying with my family, they told me his name. Selma and I were in New York a few years ago, staying in a motel, in a hotel, and we were listening to radio. All of a sudden, on the news, they were saying the Hungarian, I don't know, the Justice Department has recently found, well, I don't know what his first name was, Chatari, who became the big gangster in Košice, in the town where I went to. After I left there, which I'll tell you in a couple of minutes, there were a ghetto. They put the Jews to the ghetto there, and he used to walk around with a whip and whip the Jews in the ghetto. The same guy who interrogated me, as in his office. I couldn't believe it when I heard it. I couldn't believe it. And of course, he was supposed to die, okay, because the Hungarian Jews got a lot of bad news about him. Just a side story here to tell you how things worked out in the world.
He was deported back to Hungary.
And he was deported back to Hungary, and then he died at the age of 90 something. But it's just a kind of funny story for me. And so I lived with my family in Kasha for 1 year, and I was free and I had a good life. I just, of course, every night I fell asleep crying because I missed my parents, and I had a good time. Year passed, and one day there's a announcement on the radio in Hungarian that today there's going to be a big parade in the center of the city. We are going to welcome the glorious German army to our city. When I heard that, I got a chill in my spine, because right away I got scared, because I knew if the Nazis are coming to this town, I better do something about it. Okay, so that night, I did school that day, Hungarian school that I went to. I went to that big reception, and I saw the first time the Nazi army, and this the Mercedes cars and the cannons and the truck and the tanks and everything. I just couldn't believe it. And there was a big crowd in the, standing around, and they were applauding and welcoming them. And the mayor was welcoming. So I thought to myself, well, these people are no different than they are in Slovakia. Okay, they all love the Germans, the Nazis. So I went back, and that night I told my family, listen, I think you should think about hiding somewhere, or maybe leave this town where you are not, to some place where people don't know you, that you are Jewish. And they treated me like a little boy. Of course, I was a little boy. They said, don't worry, just don't think about it. Everything will be all right, because our regent, Horty Miklos, he's going to protect us from the Nazis. Okay? That was the message that they gave me. So I kept my mouth shut. But I just, and then one day I asked my aunt, would you do me a favor and send a message to my parents? Somehow she had a way to send a message to my parents in Slovakia. And they were still hiding in Prešov. And tell them that I want to come back home. I don't want to stay here. Okay? So my aunt, after I cried and I told her I have to go home, I miss my parents and I love you, but I just can't stay any longer. So she sent a message, and sure enough, beginning of April, a tall guy shows up, again as a smuggler, and he's looking for me, and he took me back to Prešov. Again, on the way back to cross the border, I had to be in a hay wagon on the bottom of the hay, buried under the hay, and I don't know how many hours it took. The horses were pulling this wagon, and on the border, the Nazi guards stopped the wagon, and I was sure that they were going to find me. I was 100% sure, because all they had to do is remove the hay from the wagon, and they would have found me there on the bottom. But God helped me. Very simple. They took their bayonets on their rifles, and they were poking their rifles into the hay, and they were searching. And I was like, I tried to be like a ball. I turned into a little ball, and I could feel the bayonet behind my tush, above my head. But luckily, they didn't poke it into my body. Okay, and after about 5-10 minutes of poking, they stopped. And I said, God, thank you. Okay. And then he let me off on the train somehow. I don't think these details are really necessary. But finally, I got back to my parents. So that was the first part of the of being fugitives, because that's really we were fugitives from the law. That's what it was. And because the law was that Jewish people had to be picked up and sent to Germany, right? And they didn't pick up so far. And so the next part of saving ourselves happened where my parents, while I was gone, they found some group that was making fake Baptist birth certificates. So they bought three certificates from them. So now I had a different name. I had a Gentile name, and we were traveling with that to near the Tatras Mountains. I don't know if you ever heard. In Slovakia, there's these Tatras Mountains, beautiful mountains, and people go skiing there and so on. So my parents wanted to go to the city there called Mikuláš, and be near the mountains, that who knows what can happen. We may have to end up going to the mountains, okay? And sure enough, we spent some time there, and I saw some interesting things happening there, and I don't have time to tell you all this, but we ended up in the mountains. In November 1944, just started to snow a little bit. After spending 2 months in a little village, a young teenage boy showed us the way how to get up to the mountains. And let me tell you something. We knew nothing about how to live in the mountains, okay? And simply, I mean, you know, I tell you something funny. Uh, the other a couple of years ago, I spoke to a library here in town. So at one point, they asked me about the mountains and how you were. I say, I tell you one thing, Jews don't camp in the mountains. That's what I told them. So everybody was laughing, you know. It's a funny line, but it's so true, I tell you. I don't ever remember my dear father or anybody in the family taking me up to even to a big hill, you know. So I tried to tell them our people were, you know, we are called people of the book, you know, and that's we prefer to study the book than go to the mouth. Anyway, that's the thing. Uh, so to make the story short, the highlights of the mountains. Uh, we ran into a that boy told us we should just go up in the mountains, going upwards, not sideways or no down. That we are going to find some kind of a cabin up there, open cabin. Just go in and make yourself comfortable there. Now, why? Because the cabins belong to shepherds that brought their sheep up to the mountains to graze, but not in the mountain, not in the winter. You know, they did it in the summer, and so when they left uh, back to the valley, they left they left the cabins open. So we figured we'll look for a cabin. The first couple of nights we slept outside on the snow, and then we continued, you know, going up and up, further up. And at one point, we found a cabin. The cabin door was locked. So we said, it's supposed to be open. And we knocked. And there was a Jewish man stuck his head out of the cabin and says, what do you want? So I say, we need to live somewhere. You know, we are running away from the Nazis. Say, there are too many of us here. You can't come in here. And he shut the door on us. And when he shut the door on us, I started to sob. I thought I was going to go nuts, you know. Here I was, a little boy, and here is a Jewish man tells me I can't come into the cabin, you know. My parents were just beside themselves. So we knocked. We kept knocking. Finally, they let us in. So we ended up living about, I would say about a dozen people in a small cabin. All that there was in the cabin were two bunks, you know, and a window and a door and a little potbelly stove that heated the place, and the ladies used to cook meals on top of that. So we lived with them. To me, it was boring. I was just bored being around adults. Many of them, you know, would cry every so often. Nobody knew where their families were. Parents didn't know, you know, elderly parents didn't know where the children were. And it just totally made me very sad and very unhappy. So I looked for things to do. So I decided I was going to take care of this fire burning in the little oven, you know, the potbelly oven. I took the job and I went out. I had a hatchet with me that my father bought me in the city when we were, you know, before we came to the mountains. And that hatchet was my savior. I used to cut down the dry branches, cut them small, and keep the fire going in the little stove. So I was very proud of myself. Uh, uh, there were no toilets inside, so everybody had to go do their thing behind trees or bushes in the snow. And one day, we found out that there were Nazi planes flying over the mountains, and they were spying into the mountains to see if there were any partisans or Jews hiding there. And yeah, we had partisans. They used to come and see us once in a while. They lived not far from us. And when we found out that what was going on, I thought to myself, you know, when we go out to do our thing behind the trees there's footsteps in the snow. And if they, you know, they have binoculars, they flew real low over the treetops, the Nazi spotter planes, they are going to send up some kind of military unit to check out what's going on. So I decided I found another job for myself. I cut down a big branch from the tree, and every time somebody had to go out, I followed them and I erased their footsteps when they came back. That was my new job. So I had to keep myself from going nuts. Okay, and that was fine. Now this is end of December, Christmas Day. Christmas, I'll never forget it. One of the partisans came down on skis and say, "Jews, disperse, get out of get out of the cabin and disappear," because we could see from the top where we are that there's a whole big unit of Nazi soldiers marching up the mountains. So he says, if they find you, who knows, what they do with you. So everybody got upset, of course, but the only ones who acted was my parents, and there was a young Polish family that was with us also, father, mother, and a little 4 or 5-year-old little girl. And so my mom and the Polish men said, you know what, let's get out of here. The other said, oh, it's late in the day already. They won't make it up here, it's snow on the ground. And, it's always, this being so positive. No, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, um, looking out always positively on life. And it was a wonderful thing that we had it, the Jewish community, but it didn't serve good for us because we were just too depending on our religious upbringing. God will help. Okay, that's basically what was going on. And we left. We took our backpacks and all the stuff that we could schlep, and we marched up the hill. And after a while, we come to a place. There was a little cave, opening to a little cave, and so we decided. My parents, the adults. I didn't make those decisions. The adults decided, you know what? Let's just get into this cave. We are going to hide there, and hopefully, if they find the cabin, we won't be there, and and hopefully they won't come and search further and find us in this cave. So we climbed in there. The adults took out their blankets and they put it down, and we sat on the blanket. And all of a sudden, my head was telling me, my little boy's head, how do I cover this opening to the cave? Just in case the Nazis are going to start walking around and searching the area. And my head was telling me, take your hatchet, cut down a branch, and put it in front and cover the opening. Because, it was a small opening. The adults had to get on their knees to climb in there. So that's what I did. I cut down 2 pine branches, and I pushed myself through the opening, but my butt first, and I pulled those branches against the opening, so we couldn't see out. And I figured if I can't see out, if they walk by, they are not going to see the opening to the cave. Lo and behold, at 3:00 in the afternoon, we hear this screaming and noise and shooting, and we hear there were a couple of young mothers with young babies hiding with us. Nicht schießen bitte, kleine Kinder here. Nicht schießen bitte means please don't shoot. There are little children here. And we heard all of that, and they are yelling, Raus Juden, Raus Juden. And we were sitting next to each other, holding hands and shaking, just shaking. These are the people we live with now for the last couple of months in the cabin. and or a month, whatever. And afterwards, I tell my mom, Mommy, I smell smoke. Oh, gee, smoke. So you start to see visions, you know. But and then after the smoke, we hear some boots in the snow coming in our direction. And I said to my Mom, looks like they are coming and looking for other people or something like that. Sure enough, I was peeking between the branches. I was sitting right in front of the opening. I saw a couple of Nazi soldiers walking around, talking to each other, and again, they didn't see the opening. So after a few minutes, they just walked away, and that was the last close call that I had and my parents had during this whole process of trying to avoid being taken away. Okay. Now, of course, if we wouldn't have done it, if my parents wouldn't have done what they did, I wouldn't be here today talking to you about it. I would have been gone with all my wonderful cousins and friends. You know, I was the only child, uh, my age category, that came back in my town and in my family. All the others perished. They all died in the Holocaust. So, and then we went down there, and the smoke we smelled was they burned down the cabin. They took the people out. They all went to Bergen-Belsen because we met a couple of them afterwards, and they told us that they took them to Bergen-Belsen. They burned down the cabin, but the little stove, potbelly stove, was metal, so it didn't burn down. So we all helped schlep the cabin out of there, went further into the mountain, and built another little place where we could stay. Now we also found. Don't ask me why and how, okay? Because there are a lot of things that happened throughout this whole process that to me is, looking back at it, I say, none of us were smart enough to do some of these things. There was something else that watched over us, okay? Somebody else, something else. And in the snow, covered with snow, there was a roll of tar paper. Now, I assume you all know what tar paper is, okay? That's what the builders put on your houses before they put the roof. I mean, on top of the roof before they put the shingles, okay? And that's the paper that keeps the water from getting into the houses. There was a roll of that just laying under the snow there, a few feet away from the burned down cabin.
That's fine.
And so we found that, and then we found a couple of bags of potatoes that we used to hide in the snow, just so it kept fresh, and some peas and some beans, So we slept all of these things with us. We marched up. I don't know how far, I don't know, maybe a quarter mile or something. And we built a, excuse me, a lean-to using the tar paper. And I cut down with my hatchet, I cut down some branches from the trees, and we built a little lean-to for ourselves. And we moved in that night into the lean-to. We had some string with us, to tie everything together. It was very flimsy, but we had a roof over their heads. That was important. So we survived there. We survived there until beginning of March. There was one big problem. Big problem was we ran out of food. While we still were in the cabin, there was a farm boy who came up from one of the closest villages at night, like once every 2 weeks, and brought us food. Okay, and of course we paid for it. And one day he just stopped coming, and that was the end of our food supply. Okay, what do you do in the mountains? You know, middle of the winter, so we ran out of food, and you know, all of us were just terribly depressed, and unfortunately, in addition to what the problem was with food, you know, I hate to talk about it, but I want you to understand also. My dear father, he had diabetes, okay, and he had to have food, and if you know, and he started to black out, pass out, stuff like that. And one day he tells us, my dear family, I'm going down to the village. I can't do that anymore. I have to have some food. And so my mom looks at me, looks at him, and she says, what are we going to do? Okay, if you go down, we'll have to go with you. And you know what was down in the village, right? The Nazis were there already. And so my mom looks at me and she says to me, Osi, what do you want to do? So I said to her, I don't want to go down. Okay. Here I was. And even now, as I tell you this, you know, it's hard for me to tell this. I was letting my father go, and I knew I would never see him again. So what do you call it? I call it self-preservation. Okay, that was the game. And I must tell you that as young as I was, I lived with this feeling of self-preservation the whole time. I figured I'm still a kid, okay? I want to live, okay? So whenever these tight moments came up, I always said to myself, Asi, save yourself. So I was always on the lookout every minute of the time that we were up in the mountains. I was out there looking and listening. And so one day, a partisan found us there, and he gave us a piece of bread, and he brought us a piece of beef. And from that moment on, we were able to eat. And the very beginning of March, he told us, you know, we, the partisans, decided to get off the mountain. We are going to the Russian side. They knew how to get to the Russian side of the front, down in the valley, and said to us, if you want to come with us, we'll take you with us. Okay. So of course we decided, oh, sure, absolutely. So one early morning at 6 o'clock, it was dark. They pick us up, and for a long day we were marching behind them, barely keeping up with them, because you know we were just, I don't know, I probably weighed I don't know how many pounds. I don't know. It doesn't matter really, but we were all skinny. So we came down, and they took us to a village that was already occupied by the Russian army. So that's how we were. That's how we saved our lives. That's the story. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Anything you want to ask, anything you want to know, whatever it is. Yesterday, I love to hear when the teenagers are asking religious questions, you know, about, you know, survival and religious issues and so on. And I just love to talk to them, because they're still young and they can't understand, you know, how did you stay Jewish, you know, in the process and so on. But that's what it is. It is what it is.
Your story, and again, I've had the pleasure of hearing you share on a number of occasions, but The full story, I don't know. This is the first time, and especially the very emotional scene with your father. I know that took a lot of courage to share, and we're very grateful for you giving us this gift. I know we're a little bit after 1 o'clock, but I don't, if there are others who would like to share a few questions, Ozzy, what do you say to those children who say, how do you remain Jewish after all of that? What do you say to them?
Well, here's what I said to them. My mother took her candles, Shabbat candles, in the backpack, okay? My father took his Kiddush cup in the backpack. We took prayer books with us, okay? And every Friday night, it didn't matter where we were. And there were places I didn't tell you about, okay? There were details I didn't. But we were, at one point, we were renting a room from a Christian, what was he? Minister and his wife. They were retired. And they had 2 bedrooms. We rented 1 bedroom. And there, my mom and dad, Shabbos, Kiddush and all of that stuff. And my father used to put on tefillin and daven, and so I tried to explain to them that if they would have left these things behind, I'm not sure we would have survived, okay? That this is what really kept our faith up. We continued to practice our traditions, even under the most difficult circumstances. And you hear it from people who were in concentration camp also. Some of them tried to continue, keeping our faith and so on. So, and they can't believe it. I mean, really? I mean, in the snow and in the cold and all of that? I said, yes, yes. And that's how we survived.
That's an important message for them, to keep faith and to find strength from that. I know Mel and Roberta have a question.
Ozzy, you're a very sweet guy. And I want to know, how is it that you got through this terrible ordeal and came out on the other end with the temperament that you have? You don't seem to have any anger. You seem very grateful for what happened to you. How do you account for that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really have a clear answer for you. But I can tell you one thing that I shared with them, okay? And the rabbi, you will hear it, and I don't know how you will respond to that. But I can tell you one thing. After we came back and found out that half of our families, I didn't have any cousins left. I didn't have anybody to relate to afterwards. My friends in my town, I started wondering, God, where are you? How did you, I mean, and there was only one thing that I had on my mind. Thank you, God, for saving me, okay? And that was a very important thing that I discovered since childhood. I never ask God for anything, because I don't know if God listens to me asking for anything. But I know that God will listen to me when I thank him for what he has done to me. That's how I have lived my whole life.
That's very powerful. Very powerful. Thank you.
That's the way I can explain it. I have no other way.
Yeah. Again, you've given us already well over an hour, but is there anyone else who has another question? Here's the thing: we get to have you with us singing, of course, the partisan song on Yom Kippur and teaching us. Ozzy, you are a gem. You are a treasure for our community, and you've spent so much time teaching. So maybe if there's any other question, raise a hand. I don't.
There was a question in the chat from Mara asking Ozzy if you have told your story to your grandchildren.
Good, thank you.
The grandchildren heard parts of it, okay? Our children heard all the story, okay? The entire story, not once, twice, so on. I avoided, frankly, I avoided talking about my ordeals in the, during the Holocaust, because I saw a lot of young people. I used to teach, okay, and I taught kids of Holocaust survivors, and some of them used to come to me and say, Mr. Sladek, my parents are always talking about the Holocaust, and some of them were just pushed away. They felt like it was enough, that it was not good for them. And the one thing that I remember very clearly, one of my uncles who lost his family in the Holocaust, he lost his wife and 2 children. He went to Israel, and I was in Israel, and he remarried. He started a new family, and he had 2 children, okay? Wonderful children, a boy and a girl. And once I was there when I was in the army. I was visiting with them, it was like over a weekend or something, Shabbos. And his son tells me, why does Dad always compare me to his son who died in the Holocaust? You understand that, right? And a lot of them, to me, it feels like they committed some kind of I don't know what you call it, but they drove their kids to distance themselves. They couldn't listen to the father. Usually it was the fathers more so than the mothers. My Yosel would have done it differently, or he would have been much more happy with what I said or done. And these kids were just devastated. That's what's going on. And I met a lot of grown second generation people who were telling me that also. Yeah. How they felt like their parents really screwed their heads up, and
They felt guilty.
Yeah, what they went through. We can't. There's a line in this week's Torah portion in which Aaron, who lost his 2 sons, Nadav and Abihu, and Moses tries to find some kind of rationale. God will be sanctified because of it, and the Torah says, "V'yidom Aaron," and Aaron was silent. What's the response? What can we say in reaction to any of it? Aaron, the Kohen Agadol, he was silent. There's sometimes not words to find, but I did want. I know many of us are having the memorial candles that are lit in memory of the 6 million. As we conclude, I don't know if you have a prayer book in front of you or if you don't know by heart the Kaddish. Let's say Kaddish for the 6 million, and for those whose life stories aren't being told. And Ozzy, we will treasure your story and have make sure that will continue to be honored. But let us remember those who perished, the 6 million. As we say, Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma devarach chirotei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yameachon v'chayedecha be'Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru, amen. Yeh shemei Rabbah mevarach le'elam olomei almaya, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ותרומם יתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו ואלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירם בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיא וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
Thank you, sir, for sharing. Thanks all of you for watching. This has been recorded, so if you have some friends or family who weren't able to tune in, let them know to go to our YouTube or go to the Facebook at Temple Sinai to watch it. The message that you heard today from our Osi Sladek it's an important message. It's a sacred message. It's part of our ongoing Torah. And so with that, sir, thank you very much. And Sei gesund. Go with good health.
Thank you, and I wish you the same thing. Stay well, stay healthy, and God willing, soon we'll be able to see each other, and big hug, and hopefully life will just go on like it used to be.
You'll bring your accordion.
Garmoshka, my garmoshka, you mean?
All right. Lauren, thank you for hosting, and everyone,
Absolutely.
God bless you all. Thank you, sir.